And now I would like to invite to the stage Jacek, our legal expert today.
All right, hello guys. Yeah, so nice that so many of you came here to just have some relaxing legal experience during this like tough topics conference. So I'm gonna, give you some fun probably. Is these slides? Okay, there we go. Right, so it's gonna be like lightening, relaxing experience. So I'll try to be quick. About me, I've been a crypto lawyer for quite a bit. I'm involved in like different projects, primarily in WorldCoin and Maker, now known as Sky. And just want to call it out that this is not legal advice, what I'm going to talk about. And also, I'm not like a total privacy legal expert. I just wanted to flag out a few things that I thought were relevant to like the topics of this conference. Now, what I wanted to start with is just like what applied cryptography experts, like all of you guys, had to deal with 30 years ago. So what you can see here in the picture is what was classified in the US, at least, as export-restricted munition. This is a T-shirt that includes export-restricted RSA, which is like an old cryptography algorithm, encryption source code, which is like printed in this T-shirt, as a kind of freedom of speech protest against laws that were forbidding people to export munitions like this. So like experts and cryptography designers and people who work in the space, they face like complete restrictions on exports like of munitions, like weapons, in terms of like the cryptographic algorithms that they were developing. This was kind of like the state of the problems, the legal problems that people like you faced 30 years ago. And by the way, this is still relevant to some extent, because if you look into the charges that Pavel Durov, the founder of Telegram, got, I think that some of them actually related to some of the remainings of like this type of laws and regulations, which are not like they're very much relaxed these days, but still, they persist in some form. Now, I wanted to get into what was born out of those legal restrictions, which is the movement of cypherpunks. How many of you have heard about this movement? Okay, quite a few, not surprising. So there is this manifesto by Eric Hughes that I will explain in a second why this is relevant, but this was kind of like, cypherpunks was kind of like a movement that was a reaction to those like regulatory restrictions that did not allow people to design and write open source cryptography and like cryptography solutions. Just a few quotes from the Cypherpunk Manifesto for those of you that haven't read, and I highly encourage you to read. It's excellent, very short and excellent. We must defend our own privacy if we expect to have any. And the technologies of the past did not allow us to do it, but now we have electronic technologies to do that could allow us to do this. We, the cypherpunks, are dedicated to building anonymous systems. We will defend our privacy with the cryptography, and here he gives some examples of like what can be built with cryptography, which is, for example, digital signatures, all electronic money. So this is where you can see the roots of like all the crypto, and Satoshi Nakamoto is actually like kind of like a legacy of the broader cypherpunk movement, and can be like his work can be attributed to like the subsequent wave of innovations that cypherpunks brought to the space. A few more quotes. They are writing software and nothing is going to stop them because this is open source software, and they actually won the crypto wars, right? They won against the regulatory frameworks that forbade them to make their code open source and widely accessible. And he predicted that cryptography will just spread over the whole globe because it's just like the way it will work via primarily the fact that this is open source. Now, regulations. The title of the presentation says about privacy laws. So this is probably quite obvious. We are here in Europe. I took GDPR, which is kind of like the best example out there for privacy law for the purpose of this presentation. And if you look in the GDPR, it was quite funny. It occurred to me a few years ago how similar it was to what Eric Hughes wrote in the Cypherpunks manifesto years earlier. And I had a kind of like a few riddles for you to guess. I'm going to display a few quotes, and then it's up for you to guess whether it comes from the Cypherpunks manifesto or from GDPR, if you're up for it. There we go. The processing of personal data should be designed to serve mankind. GDPR, who thinks it's GDPR? Right? Who thinks it's the Cypherpunk manifesto? Right, so like half to half. Actually, GDPR, EU. Up next. Privacy is necessary for an open society in the electronic age. EU, GDPR, who thinks so? Right, like I think that people are like less convinced now, like 5 people. Eric Hughes, Cypherpunks manifesto. Right, maybe like 50. There we go, yes, you're right. Natural persons should have control of their own personal data. GDPR, right, most of you. Eric Hughes, just a few. Yeah, it's easy, right? This is kind of like legal language. This is how you have guessed properly. And for privacy to be widespread, it must be part of a social contract. GDPR? No one? Eric Hughes? Cypherpunk? Okay, most of you. Yes, that's right. The last one, I think, any processing of personal data should be lawful and fair. GDPR? Right. Eric Hughes? A few. GDPR. So as you can see, you know, I could see like you vote in different manners. As you can see, there are like some, you know, strong connections between like the principles of like what's behind GDPR. This is about data protection, general data protection regulations. It's about protecting data. So it's about privacy. And, you know, privacy was just like the principle, the idea, the thing that Eric Hughes and other cypherpunks wanted to protect. So, you know, if we agree on the principles, does it mean that there are no friction points between privacy laws and ZK or other like privacy-enhancing technologies? It's not as simple, and I'll just like show you one example which I think is crucial. But for that, just like a few definitions so that we know what we're talking about. First, the very first definition in GDPR, which is what is personal data, and just look at the yellow part. Any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. As you can see, extremely broad, right? Any information, and in practice, this definition is like interpreted in like an extremely broad way. And like what is personal data is like expanding over time, right? Like from IP addresses to just like different things that can be like attributed to like identifiable individual. Now processing, the second most important definition. What does it mean to like process personal data, which is the regulated activity under GDPR? It is any operation or set of operations which is performed on personal data, right? You couldn't go broader than that. This is like extremely broad. You can even see in the further part of the definition that it's really, that it also applies like even to erasure or destruction of personal data. This is still processing. This is still regulated activity. And the last definition, anonymization. The GDPR makes it clear that if personal data is anonymized, it's not personal data anymore, and it like falls outside of the regulation. So this is like the holy grail of many like lawyers and technologists who are trying to find a way to comply with GDPR. Because if your data is not personal data anymore, then you're out of the scope. And since the definition of the personal data is so broad, you really want to anonymize the data so that you fall outside. And it's clear, right? This regulation does not concern the processing of such anonymous information, including for statistical research purposes. This is kind of like the way, anonymization, to get your data from this like highly regulated personal data status to something that you can process in a much easier way. But this would be like too sweet if it was like so easy, because this is actually the previous part, kind of like of the same paragraph, of the same recital of GDPR, which kind of like defines a concept of pseudonymization, which is a kind of like anonymization but reversible, or like, I'm like oversimplifying now, or anonymization but something like that kind of like obfuscates the data, but in a way that it keeps, like maintains the status of personal data. For example, you know, it is encrypted, right? It is like more difficult to say like who the data is could be attributed to, but still, you know, this attribution is still possible. And then what it means to anonymize, or what it means to do, like to conduct pseudonymization of data, of personal data, is actually a very difficult question. Because if you look at like different guidances by like many regulators around Europe, they come to like different conclusions, and it's also like very technology related, right? It really depends on like what kind of like technological measures you employ in order to try to get out of GDPR. And as you can see, like it's even not totally objective, because it says, in order to say whether something is like actually anonymization or pseudonymization, you take all objective factors, such as cost and amount of time required for identification, take into account the available technology, right? And the technology changes, right? So something that could be deemed like successful anonymization now, if, you know, in a few years' time, you can actually analyze this data and come to a conclusion that this is personal data, you know, this is just causes like so much friction and so much problem. So as you can see, like what's coming out of it is that, in principle, you know, the privacy laws and the goals of like developing privacy-enhancing technologies are aligned, right? We could see how much like confusion was there in the room whether something was said by Eric Hughes in Cypherpunk's manifesto or in GDPR. In practice, there could be quite a bit of friction, because in fact, you would like to use privacy-enhancing technology to process personal data, but sometimes it may turn out that according to the law, it's not full anonymization. So you kind of perform some complex technological operations, some complex applied cryptography, but if it's not full anonymization, right, the lawyers tell you this is not full anonymization, you're still within GDPR, and you have to comply with the law, even though we don't have like full access to the data. So many problems come out of it, that you really try to comply, and you are trying to be more privacy enhancing with the technology that you are using. But if this is not the full anonymization, this is such a holy grail, so hardly achievable, you're still within GDPR, which might make your life difficult because you're still regulated under this regulation. So again, the devil is in the implementation details. It's gonna be highly dependent on like the technology that is used and the way it is used. And figuring out anonymization under GDPR is gonna be a crucial topic. And it's already clear in the case of like many projects that use things like ZK, homomorphic encryption, SMPC, that they are trying to get somewhere, but you know, this legal assessment could like really complicate their lives, because they may be still in the same field, even though they think that they reach anonymization already. That's it. Thanks so much.
Oh, I see some question. Let's do it.
Thanks. Are blockchain addresses and like cryptographic addresses considered private information?
You mean personal data? Yes, I would say so.
That's interesting, because like it's like a mathematical operation, right? Like, I mean, I generate a private key, I publish a public key, and interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's quite clear. I think that's common consensus right now that like public keys are considered like personal data.
Any other questions from the room?
It's like just to like kind of add something to that. If an IP address, right, which could be attributed just to a machine, is personal data, right? Why wouldn't public address, like why wouldn't be? Right, but you can still identify an individual in many cases by just like having the public address, especially when you see like all the transaction data associated with an address.
Okay.